How did you first end up in FIP down in Florida for Sal?
Gabe, I was bugging Gabe for probably, I don't know, close to a year. I don't know, 8 months to a year, because Cabana and Punk were working for him in Ring of Honor, and then they were doing also the FIP stuff too, and I was dying to be a part of that. Like,
right.
I wanted to be on the road with my friends. Like, Ring of Honor was blowing up at that point. Like, if there was anywhere to be on the independents, that was it, right? So Punk was going away, had just signed to WWE, whatever, I guess that would have been 05, 04,
yeah.
I don't remember. But like, as I was explained, Gabe basically said, okay, like, this is your going away weekend in Florida for FIP. Who do you want booked? So it was like me and Ace Steel and Prazak was on those, and we were all there, and it was like a, I don't know, we love you, fuck off kind of, a party or whatever. And a great weekend, and just so happened to get me in front of Gabe. And I don't know what he saw, but that kind of went the way it went as well. But yeah, that was all Punk, man. Yeah.
First thoughts on Gabe?
I didn't know what to think about him, because, if you're in, say, 2004, 2005, it had been for a decade, and I just couldn't, and I understand it now, having worked on his side of the camera, understanding the financials and what he was actually dealing with at Ring of Honor, but I couldn't get him to give me an opportunity until this thing happened with Punk. So there were times where I was like, fuck, it's never going to happen. I don't care how many times Samoa Joe and Chris Daniels and Punk and Cabana put me over, it just wasn't happening. You know what I mean? So I think in hindsight, looking back, when I first met him, I was like, you fucking dick, like, it took this, the guy's going away, and that's when you finally booked me, because I don't know what his plans were or what his thoughts actually were. I'd never laid two eyes on him or looked at him to know what he really thought. So I don't know that I went with the right attitude, to be honest with you.
Now you started getting booked by him to work ROH right after FIP, right?
Right.
Okay. When did you first learn of Ring of Honor, and what made you want to work for the company? Did you know that it was just like, the company to work for if you were on the indie scene? Or?
I mean, it's just like I said, Punk and Cabana couldn't rave enough about it. I mean, they were convinced that this was like the next deal. This was the new ECW. That was the tagline that they were attaching to it, and like, why wouldn't I want to work there if it has all this buzz and notoriety going for itself, and my buddies are working there and they're echoing these same sentiments? Like, it's obviously the real deal.
Memories of Kerry Silkin for the very first time.
Wow. My first shot for Ring of Honor was September of 2005 in Long Island, and oddly enough, I have no memory of Kerry.
Is that a good thing or bad thing?
I don't know. It could be concussion thing.
Right.
Right.
Who'd you work?
It was a four-way. Me, Samoa Joe, BJ Whitmer, and I want to say Jimmy Rave. And I could be wrong on. I know Joe was in the match, and I'm pretty sure BJ was. I'd have to look it up. But yeah, it was fun, and it was cool just to be on the East Coast. A different thing for me.
Thoughts on the ROH locker room at the time?
It was like a who's who of the independents, and I think that was kind of... People often say that Ring of Honor was modeled after the kind of King of Indies concept, right? So, like, when you looked at the locker room, you had a lot of the same kind of faces in there.
Yeah.
Guys that you knew could go. A lot of guys that I had crossed paths with on the independents previous to getting there, so I wasn't unfamiliar, and nor were they to me. It was like, man, this is the locker room to be in.
What are your thoughts on Gabe's booking style in Ring of Honor?
People ask me that all the time, and I think they ask me that because I booked the company too after him.
Right.
And we talked about this a little bit when he and I sat down talking about Ring of Honor. I understood what he was doing. Like, the mentality behind what he was doing was 100% driven towards selling DVDs, and that's why he ran things 100 miles an hour. Like, if you have any frame of reference or common sense and can look at it objectively, you understood what he was doing and why he was doing it. So if you're on the team and you're behind the concept and you're behind the promotion, you can't help but be behind what he was doing too. Whether or not that agreed or jived with the way I was trained really didn't matter, because again, we could see what the end result is. We can see what the motive is behind this. So, and I'm sure if things were different and the business was different, he would have booked things different as well. So I don't think that's an indictment of what he did.
Yeah.
He did what he had to do to keep his job.
Your initial storyline was that you didn't feel like Jim Cornette was giving you the quality opponents at the time. When did you first come, cross paths with Jimmy? in the business early on, right?
Yeah, that would have been a WWF TV like 98, 99. And I don't even know that he would remember any of this stuff. You know, I would try to stay close to him just because I respected him from watching the Midnights and the Rock and Rolls on TV when I was young, you know, and then obviously you could see that he was in a position of power in WWF at that point as an agent, or I don't even know if that was what his title was, but like he seemed to have TV formats and stuff on him at all the time, and people were going to him and asking questions. So I figured, you know, I respect Jimmy Cornette, just what I've seen on TV, but here we now at the show, you know what I mean, and people are going to him for some of the answers. And again, I don't know that he would remember that, but probably, I don't know, after my 2.5 or 3 years of doing TVs in the area,
Right.
you know, he said to me, and he maybe just said it off the cuff, or maybe he was trying to get rid of me or whatever, but he said he might want to think about doing something other than this all the time, because eventually that's what you'll be remembered here for. And that stuck with me.
Memories of the Ring of Honor CZW feud, working with Necro Butcher, Eddie Kingston, Nate Webb, and those guys, Chris Hero.
It was great, you know, and I think the thing that really stands out to me was how organic it was, because it wasn't something that somebody put down on paper and said, we want to do this, 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 and this. You know, if I remember right, that started as a one-off between Hero and Bryan Danielson and morphed into, you know, what ended up being, for my money, it's certainly one of the greatest feuds in Ring of Honor history.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say about it, I think it could have been a lot more than it was. It had CZW kind of stepped up in terms of putting emphasis on it. And granted, CZW ran in Philly, and ostensibly that was their place, and they did their part in Philly. But ROH was it was really putting CZW over in all these other towns too, Boston, Chicago, you know. And not that maybe CZW didn't have the means to be able to do that, but it always seemed to me like one side of the thing was putting the thing over way more than the other side was. And I think in the long run, I mean, CZW could have made a lot more money with it had they had the means to do so, maybe.
Memories of the ROH versus CZW Cage of Death match. I believe it was Death Before Dishonor.
Yeah. So that was in the National Guard Armory there in Philly.
Mm-hmm.
The one previous to that, it was a 6-man. Me, Joe, BJ Whitmer against Necro. Who was it? Necro, Super Dragon. God, who's the other guy? I don't remember. I went to the hospital that night.
20 Stitches?
Staples.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. 20 Staples.
Yeah, Staples. And you know...
That was the 100th show, right?
The 100th, yeah, the Ring of Honor 100th show. The fucked thing about that is I've watched it a million times on tape. And I know Necro comes at me with a chair and he pie faces me. The chair flies away, and the next thing, it looks like my head is just ripped open. But there was nothing unsafe about what Necro did. There was nothing goofy about it. I don't remember the chair hitting me. I don't remember any pain. I just remember the chair hitting me selling against the guardrail, and Necro going, oh shit. And then I feel like this fucking waterfall of blood just all over me. I have no idea to this day. I still have the scar out. I mean, you can see that on the camera. My hair's growing.
Oh, yeah.
But like, yeah, you know, badge of honor, I suppose.
Memories of the post-match angle where you and J.J. Dillon and Cornette beat Homicide down. That was at Death.
That was at the Cage of Death.
Yeah, definitely.
Cage of Death. Everybody's happy. Whatever. Ring of Honor had won, and then I think that was to start the angle to really get the Homicide over.
How was he to work with?
Homicide loved him. Loved him to this day. You know, I saw him a couple of weeks ago or last week, and I remember it seemed like we had a little thing going from that angle. JJ and Cornette, or me and JJ handcuff Homicide to the post, and then Jimmy whips him with the belt, and I thought, this is cool. This is a good angle where I'm a heel again, because I was a babyface in the Ring of Honor thing, which was kind of opposite of my natural disposition in the ring anyway. And then I worked a couple times with Homicide. We did a cage in Chicago, and then it just kind of disappeared.
I was going to ask you about the cage match. Why did the Homicide match it never really had a blow-off? You guys had the cage match in Chicago, but that didn't appear to be the blow-off to the feud, as there were angles later on, but nothing really happened.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, and I would have loved to work with him, because I think that he complimented me well, and vice versa. And I think the promos themselves were entertaining. You know, he's such a different promo, and I can be whatever promo you need me to be in the scenario. And then we had a real good one. One of my favorite matches actually was that cage in Chicago for how simple it was and how easy the people were, and we had them in the palm of our hand. And then, like I said, it kind of just dried up. I'm not sure why Gabe did that, to be honest with you.
You then formed the Hangman 3 in ROH with BJ and Brent. What were your favorite stories of working with those two guys?
I felt like we were like on the island of misfit toys at that point. It seemed like I went from that angle with Homicide into the thing with BJ and Brent, and I love them to this day. But like, we never felt like we had any kind of clear direction as to what, number one, what was expected of us, and two, where were we going with whatever that was. It was kind of like, oh, we have matches, there's a tag, we had a 6-man, it was kind of like, we really felt like just fodder on the card, like, shit, I have these guys and we need to book them.
Yeah.
So that we were just throwing in matches, and that could be completely way off base. And wrestlers will bitch about their booking all the time, and I'm as guilty as that as anybody. But I remember just a lot of time going, fuck, I don't know what we're doing, but we're happy to be getting paid, and we're happy we're booked, so we just kind of bitch to ourselves.
Why did Brent leave the business?
Out of respect to Brent, I think I won't touch that one, other than to say I'm extremely proud of him for where he has gone and to where he is now. He's very happy. Again, he's outside the business now, but he easily one of my two favorite opponents, hands down.
Memories of working with Larry Sweeney.
Yeah, man. I just donated one of my singlets. It's funny, we just talked about Brent too. So every year there's a donation made on behalf of, or in his name, in Alex Wybrow's name, to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And they're doing a fundraiser this year at the Squared Circle Lisa Marie's restaurant in Chicago. And one of the organizers of that asked me if I had anything I would donate to be raffled off to donate to his cause. And so I donated the singlet that I wore at, I don't remember what the name of the show was, but it was like one of my last matches as an active performer in Ring of Honor in Philadelphia against Brent for the NWA title, where I went over. And Alex went to the ring with me that night. I donated that singlet. He was incredible. Not just as a talent, he's one of those guys who could instantly get over in whatever room he was in. He had just that knack for being someone that you would fixate on. You couldn't take your eyes off of him. You were engaged in whatever he was doing. He had that natural gift. I would think in a lot of ways he was a genius. And then as I step back and kind of look at things too, it makes me almost sickened to wonder why it is that these people we look at as geniuses, guys like him, are afflicted. And obviously he was bipolar and had a real hard time with that.
Were you aware of his personal issues?
Sure. I think a lot of his trials and tribulations in dealing with that, particularly once I took over the book at Ring of Honor, like people, I would get those calls at 2 or 3 in the morning and be on the phone with him for 2 hours while he rambled, or while he would talk about suicide, or while he would complain, or but I felt like in a lot of ways he didn't have an ear, and he certainly had friends. Chris Hero was real tight with him and other people,
Jimmy.
but he I miss him. I miss him every day. I was the one in the office. When I say the office, I was in San Diego, but
right.
In the Ring of Honor office, I got the call when he had passed, and that was one of the hardest days, probably the hardest thing I ever had to deal with in that position at Ring of Honor, was to, number one, tell Carrie, and then be kind of the point person for all the boys who felt about him the way I did. We loved him. We felt terrible for the things he was going through, and it was particularly sad for me knowing that, number one, I couldn't help him gain control over his situation because he didn't know how to gain control over it. I had to fire him. I fired him in Houston. Terrible. Just terrible. I miss him every day. He was amazing.
How do you think he should be remembered in this business?
I think he was one of those guys who just literally had that gift to be able to take you on an emotional roller coaster, but you couldn't help coming away, at least I never could. You couldn't help but come away smiling at whatever antics he was doing. I was honored to have him as my manager in Ring of Honor just because I knew he was going to add to the act every time. He wasn't one of these guys you had to worry about taking away from the act. He was always going to be the icing on the cake. And he always was. And I think that if I'm going to remember him probably very differently than the wrestling fan will, just because of the experiences that I had with him, things that I knew about him and talked to him about. But like, if I'm a fan, I'm looking at Larry Sweeney, and ain't no doubt about it, and I got a smile on my face without question.
You began carrying a briefcase in ROH, and eventually it was revealed to be the NWA title. Who put together that deal for the belt to appear in ROH?
I'd been bugging Gabe. I mean, I was NWA champion from September of 07 until whenever the hell that was, but it was almost a year, I want to say. And I don't blame him. You know, I've talked to him. Why would he want to give exposure to another brand, especially one that didn't have a whole lot of respect, particularly on the independents at that level and then at that time? And I don't know why. Maybe he was tired of hearing me bitch about it, or maybe he was tired. I mean, people would ask all the time. You know, it's not like the fans weren't aware of that. You know, they would make comments or whatever. So I remember him calling and saying, "Hey, I need a main event for Dayton," and I don't even remember what year it was, but he goes, "What do you think about bringing that belt out?" And I was like, "Cool," because I knew it was going to serve, you know, two masters. One, it was going to expose the NWA on the level that it was to that audience, and I was going to be the focal point of that. And I knew that if he was going to do that, that was going to guarantee me some bookings and maybe booked protected in a way.
Right.
And he did. He absolutely did. And then on the other side of things, I could go back to the NWA promotions and say, "Look, what I'm doing with your belt, I got it here, and it's on pay-per-view, and blah, blah, blah." So, like, I was all for it, obviously. Why wouldn't you be?
You had the title versus title match, I believe it was in Dayton, Ohio with Nigel.
Yeah. Gabe called me and he goes, "I need this match," and I'm like, "Well, that's weird," because I'd been, you know, a fourth or fifth match guy for him, usually working with younger baby faces, putting them over as they went up the card, and for him to kind of throw that out there, I didn't think it made a whole hell of a lot of sense. Maybe he was scrambling for a main event. You know, I mean, as a booker, you get burnt out, particularly in towns. I wouldn't say Dayton was a B town, but Dayton was a B town. You know, so. Yeah. You could get away with saying with certain things. The same 450 people were going to come regardless.
You did the finish there, I think it was over the top DQ. Mm-hmm. Do you think finishes like that today, I guess, have a place in wrestling?
The old Dusty finish?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think any finish has a place in wrestling. It all depends how you sell it, how you put it over, and more importantly, why you're doing that kind of thing. You know, if it's a one-off, I don't see anything wrong with that. If you're doing it every main show or every other week or whatever, then obviously that's a problem. But like, I never had an issue with countouts, DQs, or anything like that, because as a writer or as a booker, these are tools, right? You use these finishes to tell your storyline, and if you're going to book a down finish, it's usually to push the envelope or go to the next thing.
Right.
You don't ever want to piss your fan base off so they stay pissed off. You know what I mean? And I think he did that finish because that was the finish that had to be done. I mean, Nigel wasn't going to lay down, and I don't expect that he would have. There was no reason you wouldn't put any belt over the Ring of Honor belt, and at the same time, I couldn't lay down for him just because I don't want to get the heat from the NWA guys. I mean, I suppose I could have, but like, again, I was serving two masters at that point, and he was gracious enough to, I guess, not give a shit to the point where he's like, "Fuck it, let's do this old Dusty finish," and it worked. And people shit on the Dusty finish. I have never done the Dusty finish where it doesn't work. Right. It always works.
Who put together the deal for the NWA title to change hands at the Hammerstein?
I think it was probably a combination of both me and Gabe.
Okay.
You know, the NWA had never changed their championship in New York City ever. So that was attractive. And I think I pitched that to Gabe first when he was like, you know, "We want you to work with Brent." And I was already working with Brent across the country on an NWA show, so it made all the sense in the world. We were going to kind of marry these two angles together. And I said, "Hey, you know, they've never changed the belt in New York. I wanted to be booked on New York."
Right.
You know what I mean? So it made all the sense in the world. And then to go out there and have that kind of match, probably, which will go down as probably my favorite match ever.
I was going to ask you, do you think that was your finest on-camera hour in ROH?
I don't know. I mean, you know, I always hate my matches. I think we're all guilty of that as performers. There's a lot about that match I'm real happy with, and it's probably my favorite match that I've had. So obviously, you know, I'm going to look favorably on it. Is it the best match I've ever had? I don't know. I don't know that I would say that.
Is it true Gabe thought that, I guess the match wasn't going to get over with the fans live, and when it did, what was his reaction?
Oh God, I mean, you'd have to ask Gabe that. I'm not sure. I don't know why he would. I don't know where that came from or why anybody would say that, but it obviously got over. You know, we went out there. I remember him being pissed off that we went over time, and I remember thinking like, "Fuck you!" Like we just had this place on their feet. You know?
Right.
later on in life, as I was doing his job and guys would go overtime, I would be the same thing, like, fucking great match, but fuck you for going overtime. You know, so I totally get it.
ROH announces that you have been released in 2009, September. What happened there?
Money.
Money?
Money. I mean, I can count. I mean, I could actually, I should say, I couldn't count how many times I was asked, "Can you move anywhere but San Diego?" My plane tickets to this day, like I probably, and I'm booked a lot.
Right.
I could be booked
a lot more.
Double if I lived, even if I lived in LA.
Right.
You know, the difference in fares are so much. Just 2 or 3 hours up the road. But yeah, it was cost cutting. And you know what? To Gabe's credit, like we had done the CZW thing, we did the thing with Brent. I don't know what there was left for me to do as a talent in Ring of Honor. I was never going to go out there in the top 2 or 3 matches on the card and work the way that those guys worked. That just, number one, wasn't my strength, and two, I wasn't willing to kill myself.
Yeah. Behind the scenes, Carrie, he's making moves to replace Gabe as the booker. When were you first approached about replacing Gabe? Were you still with the company at all? Was there little hints?
We talked about that when we shot the other thing with Gabe, but like it was the weekend.
That's a new DVD coming out with Face Off.
Yes, and you'll love it. You'll love it. I swear you'll love it.
Get it at rfvideo.com, by the way.
Yes, you will. It was the weekend of my last event, and it wasn't like someone outwardly said, "Hey." There were just little things that were mentioned from some of the office guys in Boston the night before. Right. Like, if you were in this position, what would you do with this? And I thought it was very odd for a guy who was fucking going away. But, yeah.
How soon did you make a commitment to Carrie to say, all right, this is something I can do. Let's handle it this way?
I want to say it was maybe 2 weeks. Because when he offered me the job... as you people will find out in the new Face Off DVD between myself and Gabe Sapolsky, he offered me the job at intermission of my last event, which was the next day in Philadelphia. I forget what it was, September of 09, I think you said. Or no, 08?
Right.
Whatever. I went on second that night against Brent. When Sweeney went to the ring with me, it's all tied together. And then Nigel and Roderick Strong each got me a case of beer. We had a little party. I was completely 3 sheets to the wind by intermission when Kerry says, "Hey, come on in the parking lot with me at the ECW arena. We're underneath the freeway." When he says, I want you to have this job, I totally thought he was fucking out of his mind. I mean, I'm hammered listening to this. But when he offers me the job, I said, "Kerry, I need some time." I just had a new baby. My son was 6 months old at that point. Like, there was a lot going on for me personally. And I certainly couldn't digest it in one day. So yeah, it probably took a couple weeks before I was like, okay, let's give this a shot.
Did you ever reach out to Gabe at all? If not, why not?
We talked, I want to say it was about a month later, and that's an awkward thing, you know what I mean? Like, I know you're going to lose your job. Do I call you and tell you you're going to lose your job? And my thought process at the time was, if I call him and I tell him this, it immediately ixnays me getting this job, one, and I wanted the job.
Right.
Because it was the next logical step for me in the wrestling business. And two, Gabe and I didn't have that kind of relationship where I would look at it and go, if I don't call him and tell him this, then I'm a shitty human being. It's not like we were friends necessarily. Not that that's good, bad, or indifferent, but it just wasn't a situation where I felt obligated that I should call this guy and tell him, "Hey man, these guys are going to fire you." Wasn't really my business. I just knew that I was the next guy in, if that makes any sense. And when we did talk about it, there was some speculation from some people that I knew a lot more about the situation than I actually did. And I don't have any problem being honest with anybody. I mean, I told them the same story I just told.
Yeah.
I was shit-faced in the fucking parking lot when Kerry offered me this thing the day I was let go because of the cost. I didn't know anything more than that other than Sid Ike asking me some really random questions the night before in Boston. Beyond that, man, hand to God, I didn't know a thing.
What were your goals when you first got the job?
Got to figure out what the hell I was doing.
Right.
I mean, it's like I said this publicly, I had no experience. We were running upwards almost 50 shows a year with 25 guys under contract in multiple markets. I'd never wrapped my head around something like that previous to that. So probably the first 8 or 9 months was simply about, okay, let's figure out, number one, how how are all these personalities in this locker room, which I know them all as wrestlers, but now I'm their boss. So now these personalities, I'm going to see the other side of these people. It was about gauging and figuring out where people were. I had a lot more information about the roster now. I knew what everybody was getting paid. You could see who was lying about it for all those years, and myself included. But, I mean, there was a lot to the position outside of wrestler A versus wrestler B. This is your time and your finish. I think the biggest adjustment for me in that position was the babysitting that went along with it. And I don't mean that in a negative.
Right.
I mean, like, managing personalities and kind of getting all these people to steer the ship on the same course to a man. That was the challenge.
Now, you said Sid took you aside and started asking you some questions. Did it ever occur to you he knew nothing about the wrestling business? Who was he to ask you questions? Of course. Yeah.
And
I mean, he knew nothing about the wrestling business, except certain aspects that didn't have to do with the business, but that go along with the wrestling business.
You know what? Sid's an odd one. In the sense that if he and I are sitting at the bar, I would love Sid. If you asked me if I ever trusted the man, I could never give you an affirmative on that.
Right.
And that's not to speak to, his shadiness or otherwise. That's
right.
Just saying, you get a read on somebody and you either like this guy or you don't like this guy. And most of the time I didn't like this guy. And I know he didn't like me most of the time either. Probably because I saw he was full of shit half the time.
I got you. Is it true that you were hired because they didn't trust Gabe maybe to be able to produce ROH on HDNet?
That's a new one.
That's the question that's thrown at you.
That is a new one. I'd never heard that one. I don't think Gabe would have had any trouble writing TV. Frankly,
yeah.
It's not like not that it's not rocket science, but it ain't rocket science. And he's a wrestling mind. I can't imagine where that one would come from. No, I never heard that.
Was it hard to get the locker room on your side when you first got in?
Not at all.
Okay.
I think there was a period of adjustment, and I've said this before too. People need to realize that Ring of Honor wasn't exactly the most financially stable entity on planet Earth, and never was.
Right.
But at that period of time, I would have conversations with Kerry frequently where he was talking about closing the place down, and I can't afford this, and obviously I was being let go for cost cutting,
yeah.
And obviously you would understand
yep.
what I'm talking about. Yep. So, I think the guys were more worried about, are we going to get paid as opposed to who's booking the card, you know what I mean?
What was your first communication with ROH's roster at the time when you were named Booker?
Once all that came out, I sent an email to the entire roster, which was immediately leaked to the wrestling press. And I know who, but I'm not going to say because there's no fucking point in putting them over. But it was just basically saying, hey, I know you're all in shock, so am I.
Right.
We were just at the bar last week or whatever, or sleeping 8 to an hotel room. But the thing I wanted to convey to them guys is that I had their back, and I wasn't any different of an individual just because I was more responsible now for what they were doing than I ever was, And I think that was one of the things that endeared me to the locker room instantly is they had a camaraderie with me. In the hotel, in the airport, in the cars, in the ring, bleeding, sweating, bumping, drinking, all of that shit that the boys do together. I had that intimacy, if that's the right word, with these guys. There was a trust inherent right away. Whether or not I could book anything or whether or not what we were going to do was going to make any money was yet to be seen. And of course, I was forthright with all of them and saying, hey, I've never done this before in the volume that they're asking me to do this, so I'm swinging for the fences, and I hope you guys will do that with me. But yeah, the first communication was an email just saying, hey, it's me.
Were you apprehensive about walking into, someone else's locker room and running the show? But now it was yours.
Yeah, of course, right? There was a lot of things going on with that. Gabe has a way of endearing himself to a fan base, and a lot of people ostensibly identify Ring of Honor in the heyday with Gabe Sapolsky. And I think if Gabe was sitting here, he would tell you he probably doesn't deserve as much credit as he gets, but he'll take it, right? So yeah, it's daunting,
What changes were you asked to bring to ROH by Carrie?
More variety, shorten the shows, slow things down. It wasn't uncommon for us to run 4.5 hours. And again, when your mindset is we need to sell the DVD of this show, and we've got 9 matches on the show, then every one of these 9 matches has to be balls to the wall because somebody might like match 1, somebody might like match 2. The goal is to sell as many of these DVDs as possible, so we got to go crazy. And Kerry was like, no, we need to slow things down because as it was explained to me, and we talked about this again. Face Off with Gabe Sapolsky coming soon, our video. It was my understanding that the DVDs hadn't sold since like 2005.
Now you brought some new talents to the company. Who are some guys that you brought in that weren't there before?
Joey Ryan jumps to the forefront. Rashi Brown, Skull Crusher Rashi Brown, who I've talked about a variety of things. I mean, I think that's what you find with bookers is there a booking style? I mean, I guess there is a style to booking, but I think moreover, wrestling bookers do the things on the shows that they like. Right. So I like bigger guys. I like guys like Bison Smith, Dark City Fight Club. Guys that if you walk down the street and saw this guy, you would say, that guy would whip my ass. I wanted people like that.
Right.
As opposed to, some of the other things that Gabe was doing. But that's not to say that what Gabe was doing wasn't awesome, because it was. I was on the shows,
You pulled yourself off TV, which is a great move. No ego.
Right.
What made you pull yourself off TV?
That's it. I mean, you said no ego, and I think, not that I was trying to get myself over with the boys, because I didn't care about that, but what I wanted to do, it was send them a clear and distinct message that I am not going to be like every other wrestler who's a booker and push myself. In fact, I'm going to go completely 180 and not even work.
Right.
I was doing a lot of NWA bookings at that point. It wasn't like I was hurting for in-ring work. And at the same time, I thought this was the easiest way to convince this locker room if I needed to do anything more to solidify kind of a camaraderie and convince people that I was going to be behind them as opposed to behind myself. It was very easy for me to say, it's your show, brothers. I'm just here. I'm just kind of waving the magic wand or guiding the ship, as it were. I didn't even want to deal with that. Again, it's not like it was the 70s or the early 80s where a booker as a wrestler could get away with that because nobody would knew. Everybody instantly knew who was writing the show.
Right.
I think I worked 4 times in those 2 years, and only in instances where somebody couldn't make it or was hurt or got stuck at the border. It was some kind of snafu like that. And in every single case, I either did the job or wasn't involved in the finish at all.
Discuss Kerry and your dealings with him, and what was like the biggest fights with him to get to see your creative vision.
I think the interesting thing about me and Kerry is we have a lot of the same likes in terms of wrestling. So, and I think that's why he gravitated towards me ultimately to take over the role, is because we weren't polar opposites in terms of what we liked.
Right.
We liked a lot of the same shit. We like varieties. We like big characters. We like that kind of shit. So, I mean, we would talk about, and that's not even limited to wrestling. We like a lot of the same music
right.
and, shit on Broadway or whatnot. We just seem to be kindred spirits in a lot of ways. So I think it made him comfortable with me. I mean, I didn't really have a lot of arguments with Kerry in terms of what we wanted to do, because I think the other side of that coin is anything that I wanted to do, I made sure to include Kerry in on the decision, because I knew that previous to me there wasn't a lot of that. And I think Gabe even alludes to that, like he was the Iron Fist and what I wanted was happening, that kind of thing. And I didn't want to be that. I figured this man's writing the checks.
Right.
It's his wallet solely that's funding this entire thing. I think that the least he deserves is input in this. So I didn't really make decisions that he didn't okay. Like if I went to him and said, I want to do this, and he farted on it, I probably wouldn't have done it. I didn't have a whole lot of those instances.
What are the best and worst things about Kerry as a boss and a person?
Oh God, I think the answer to both of those is generosity. I think anytime you have somebody who's willing to give and give and give, ultimately you find people who
take
just as easy want to take. And I saw a lot of that with Kerry. And the problem is he didn't know when to say no. That said, without Kerry Silken, and you know as well as I do, without Kerry Silken, that fucking company doesn't exist today.
100%.
So there's, for me specifically, a huge debt of gratitude. He opened a door for me and allowed me to move forward in wrestling, opening up my eyes to an entirely different side of the business that I wouldn't have otherwise had the exposure to. At the same time, on my watch, 25 guys who went to the bank every week did so solely because Kerry Silken put money in their account. You know what I mean? And people don't think about that, I think, as much as they should. And at the same time, people take advantage of them too.
Was it hard getting a read on the ROH audience, and how different was it booking for them as opposed to AWS in California or an NWA event?
I don't know that it was difficult to get a read on fans because I think wrestling is wrestling, and ultimately there's a limited amount of psychologies and things you can do in the ring, and they've all been done a billion times. I think the difficult part that, at least for me, that I had was the fans knowing who it was writing the show, and I always had an issue with that, and I was never one of these guys. 10 years ago, we wouldn't be doing this interview because I was trained kayfabe and you fucking protect the business and all that, these antiquated and outdated kind of notions, but I think there's merit in why those existed, and it made it very difficult for me to kind of fall in line with the Ring of Honor fans, especially the ones that knew everything that was going on because they were smarter than everybody, right? So...
Do you feel that you ever did it with some of the DQs or run-ins?
No, not at all. Because I actually went through the entire booking sheets of that 2-year period and of all those shows and all those TVs, and I think DQs and run-ins accounted for 5% of everything I ever did. So I think that's a case of our wonderful internet blowing up. You got a pimple on your ass, and all of a sudden it's cancer.
Yeah. Now, you worked with a lot of talent in Ring of Honor.
Sure.
I mean, the list is huge. It's who's who of wrestling right now. Some of these guys are now obviously in WWE, top guys. Bryan Danielson,
of course.
Chris Hero, Jerry Lynn, Colt Cabana, Delirious, who you worked a little bit with Jim Cornette, the Briscoes. The list goes on and on.
You name it.
Generico, Steen,
Roddy.
Any of the names, any stories that you might want to talk about? I mean, I don't want to be here all night because there's just so many guys to talk about, but...
Man, I say this and I believe it. You couldn't ask for a better crew of guys, and particularly I think, and people ask me too, the thing that I'm most proud of in that 2-year stint running the wrestling operations was solidifying this brotherhood. We were a family, period.
Right.
And I feel like that to this day when I see these guys. These are not only the guys that I bumped and bled and sweat with and been drunk with and all the bullshit that happens in wrestling, but these are the guys that also went through the transition with me from Gabe. These are the same guys that had their checks bounced just like everybody else, that we all went through all that together. And it sucks how it all ended off, for me anyway, because we were just really at the tip of the iceberg. 2010 was a great year for the company and for that locker room. I don't really have any. I mean, there's a lot. There's a million stories. I set my arm on fire one time in a bar in New York with the Briscoes.
Right.
There's a story, but I don't know, man. For me, when it's all said and done, I'll take away snapshots of things like that. I won't remember the matches. You remember the shit that happened in the car, in the hotel.
What led you to being released by ROH?
I think an inherent distrust of the people running the business end of the company, and I talked about that a little bit when me and Gabe sat down. It was funny to see how very similar our opinions, he and I, are of some of the things that happened on his watch and in mine, and how similar they were. And and I said when I left, oil and water don't mix. A liar and a thief is a liar and a thief, and I don't give a shit who's observing it. I just had a real problem with everything that was Ring of Honor other than the wrestling. I leave it at that.
There's been a few times ROH wanted to bring you in as an announcer, and it was blocked. I don't know. Did you talk about that at all with the Gabe?
A little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. But, it's Ross Abrams. He did it. And I don't mind. I don't hate people. I don't know that I'm capable of hate, but if I was, he'd probably be at the top of that list. I just never, ever could get on the same page with this guy. I told the story on the other DVD. Can I tell it here?
Yeah, 100%.
My very first interaction with this human being. It's not the first show I worked in Long Island, but maybe the second one after I asked Gabe. I said, can I get a copy of that DVD? I was real happy with it. It was kind of a big deal for me. He said, yeah, just go to the gimmick table, and the merch guy's name is Ross. Tell him I said it's okay for you to have a copy of the DVD from Long Island. Great. And I waited for the main event was on, I think, whatever. I snuck to the gimmick table, and he was there, and he was dealing with a fan who was making a purchase or whatever. And so I kind of stood back and just waited for him to finish that business or whatever, and it was taking forever. So I grabbed the DVD and I kind of held it up and pointed to it like, I'm going to take this. And he held his finger up, like, wait. I said, okay. I was new, and I didn't know him. So he finishes that shit, whatever. I had come to DVD and I go, Gabe told me to tell you this is okay for me to have this. And he goes, that's $25. And I said, no. But Gabe said for me to tell you like it's okay. And he goes, I don't care what Gabe told you. I'm telling you it's $25. And I was like, okay. I said, well, how about if I come over to that fucking table and take the $25 out of your ass? And he kind of.
I wish I was there.
Oh. I went back to the back and I went right to Gabe and I go, what? I thought it was a rib. What the fuck's this guy's deal? And I told him the story and he goes, you're kidding. I go, no, I'm not kidding. Like, I'm going to slap this fucking guy in the mouth. I don't know him.
Right.
You know, whatever. That's 2005. I mean, and now just think about that. It never got better between he and I. And it was cordial, but fake cordial. Like, and I even remember, there's so many, like, I'm going to write a book someday, and some of the, like, it's not even going to be believable.
I'll beat your stories, trust me.
I'm sure you will. Like, I would call the office, and I would hear Sid baiting Ross to fucking talk shit to me over the phone from 3,000 miles away. Like, what the fuck is going on? Like, just to jump to the fucking chase. Cornette wanted me to come in and be the color guy on the TV when they sold to Sinclair. It was going to be me and Kevin Kelly doing the broadcast. Great. I agreed to it. Everything's good. Ross went to Sinclair HR and filed a workplace, what the fuck was it when I got the email? It was, not workplace violence, but basically that's what it was.
Right.
I'm not a fucking employee. I'm not an employee of Sinclair Broadcasting. So how can you file an HR complaint against somebody who's not an employee? I had him threaten me. At least he was telling the truth that time, because I threatened that son of a bitch many times. And Kerry would always have to pull me aside. Be the better man. Turn the cheek. You're better than him. Blah, blah,
Carrie
blah.
didn't like him either.
No one liked him.
Yeah, no, I know.
Nobody liked him. I don't. And here's the thing. I pity him because I don't think he liked himself. And I haven't spoken to him. It's been, God, 4 years now since I've actually spoken to the man. And I wish him, if you're watching this, I don't know if he even cares about the business. I hope you are happy. I hope you found a place in your heart that you could be content with, because Lord knows the sure shit wasn't a Ring of Honor. Okay. So I was supposed to do that, didn't go through. I don't even know how much you know. A year later, this happened a couple of times.
Yeah.
One time, the second time he filed the complaint, he told the Sinclair HR that I threatened to kill his family. If anybody on planet Earth knows me at all, I'm not that guy. And I even said I talked to Joe Koff, and I said, Joe, if he just told you the truth that I threatened to whip his ass, he'd be telling you the truth.
Right.
This other bullshit. Like, that's the sad thing. I ended up getting paid from Ring of Honor, from Sinclair Broadcasting, for dates that I agreed to, and never worked there. Never worked there. So he was thinking he was fucking me right before Christmas, mind you, whatever year that was, 2 years ago, a year ago. And I still got paid. So, like, it was like... And he's not, from what I understand, he's not there, maybe due to some less than legal activities involving the company, and karma is a bitch.
This is your interview, so I don't want to even share my stories. I can tell you off camera. But
I would be, I'll drink to that.